Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to the Health Habit Podcast. As a nutrition therapy practitioner and somebody that has a bachelor's degree in nutrition and dietetics, I've spent a lot of time talking with people who want to eat healthier. But even though they are desiring this clean, healthy diet, they're still struggling to make the daily decisions to choose healthy foods. So today I'm talking about one of the main obstacles that prevents people from making the choice to pick something healthy over something quote unquote unhealthy. What we're talking about is a hidden obstacle in modern nutrition known as hyperpalatability. And this is just a fancy word for foods that are designed, usually intentionally, to be extremely flavorful and pleasurable. So much so that they can override our body's natural fullness cues, lighting up the reward systems in the brain like a slot machine and making it almost impossible to eat just one. This hyperpalatability is usually accomplished using a high fat, sugar, and salt combination. Now, I'm sure there are foods coming to your mind, things like chips, cookies, a lot of fast food and prepackaged snacks, because they trigger this dopamine reward center. It primes us for food seeking behaviors, which is why it's so hard to put down these foods. It's not just a matter of willpower, it's also that you are fighting biology. Our brains want us eating those foods. The reward centers are lighting up, and then we are having to override the biology and make a decision to put the food down. And it can get even more tricky when you are one of those people that wants to eat healthy but is struggling to do so, because when you eat a bag of Doritos versus baby carrots, the flavor differences are dramatic. Processed, hyperpalatable foods are designed to be utterly delicious. So when you eat something like a cucumber or baby carrot, it's not lighting up the reward center in the same way. So it might not be as mentally or psychologically satisfying, even though the nutrient density is so much higher and it's going to be more nourishing and satisfying to the body on a physiological level. So it's just this added layer that not a lot of people talk about. But it is so important to be aware of, because it's really easy to fall into the trap of beating yourself up like, oh my God, once again, I chose the M&M cookies over the apple. And you have to give yourself a little bit of grace, because it's not easy to train your taste buds and your brain away from craving hyperpalatable foods. It is a longer, gradual process, and being aware that hyperpalatability even exists is really helpful to overcoming that step, being like, okay, yeah, I'm overriding my biology. Like, I'm making a super rad decision to focus on nutrients over flavor. And the unfortunate reality is that healthy foods are sometimes less flavorful. Now, of course, you can make healthy foods absolutely delicious, don't get me wrong, but if we're looking at hyperpalatability versus natural occurring flavors, there's going to be some difference. You got to get a little creative. A little extra sea salt, spices, stuff like that. And in fact, when you eat a lot of hyperpalatable foods, you actually desensitize your taste buds to a lot of natural flavors. And natural sweetness is a really great example of this. So I'm going to tell you a true story from when I was in high school. At this point in my life, I was vegan. And at that point in time, there were not many vegan dessert options. So I had little to no sugar in my diet. And I also was eating no processed foods. So in this moment, I'm with my friend. I have 2 apples in my bag and we're hungry. So I'm like, hand her an apple. I start chomping down the other apple. And this apple to me tastes good. I'm enjoying it. My friend starts to eat hers and immediately is like, oh my God, this apple is so sour. How are you eating that? I'm like, maybe my apple is different than your apple somehow. So I take a bite of hers, and to me, it tasted sweet. To her, she could not taste any of the natural sweetness in that apple. Her taste buds were desensitized to that level of sweetness versus me that was consuming little to no sugar had a very high sensitivity. So I could taste flavors that she couldn't. And that taste bud perception difference is due to both neural and cellular changes. So a high sugar, high fat diet can actually change the specific taste receptor cells and then downregulate receptor expression in the tongue, directly altering which flavors we can actually perceive. And it also reprograms our neurons and responsiveness to sweet stimuli. Some studies have found that removing hyperpalatable foods from the diet can restore this taste bud sensitivity and also restore the cell numbers, but the degree of recovery depends on the duration and the intensity of the prior exposure to hyperpalatable foods. So just be aware that if you've been consuming these processed hyperpalatable foods for a very long time, it might take longer and you might end up still having less sensitivity and a lower number of taste bud cells. But I think there's a lot more research that needs to happen in this area. So if you're at a point where you are going to pivot away from processed hyperpalatable foods to healthy whole foods, your taste buds will change. So there may be a point where the food is not as flavorful. Maybe you need to add more salt, more spices in order to get more enjoyment from your food. But over time, your preferences will shift, your taste buds will shift, and literally your biology will shift. Now, I want to end this discussion of hyperpalatable foods and taste preferences by discussing two ways that you can improve satisfaction with whole foods. The first is to offer a lot of texture differences within your meal. They have done some really cool studies, and having different texture profiles within the same dish can really boost our satisfaction. It can also alter how much food we eat because it makes us feel more satisfied quicker. And then the second method you can use to boost satisfaction while you're transitioning from hyperpalatable to natural whole foods is to incorporate more umami flavor. So umami is considered the fifth basic taste, and it is present naturally in a lot of different foods, notably seaweeds, mushrooms, and fermented foods. Things like kimchi, miso, fermented soy, but also some vegetables such as tomatoes and green peas, as well as yeast. So you can in fact consume yeast and it has umami. So my personal favorite is Bragg's nutritional yeast. It's loaded with so many different nutrients, and putting that on your food can increase the umami flavor, and umami has been known to increase satisfaction and taste perception. So utilize those two methods, bringing more texture complexity to your meals and incorporating more umami flavors into your meals, and that's going to help boost satisfaction and make it easier for you to pivot from a processed hyperpalatable diet to a more natural, whole food, nutrient-dense diet. Because we've been talking a lot today about the mental and psychological aspects of these foods and how they affect physiology, I did want to take an extra moment to talk more about the mental health costs. So regular intake of hyperpalatable foods has been linked to increased rates of depression, anxiety, and stress. As we talked about, these foods can disrupt and impair brain signaling, alter neurotransmitter release, and also promote some low-grade inflammation. And all three of these things can negatively impact mood, memory, and emotional resilience. And they may also fuel a harmful feedback loop where emotional eating worsens your mental health, and then the poor mental health increases cravings for these foods. Because as we've talked about, because they override hunger cues, we tend to compulsively eat. And so all of this just reinforces this food to satisfy emotional need type of framework. So it can cause this feedback where when we are in more emotional states, we're grabbing the very foods that are actually worsening and potentially causing some like addictive behaviors. And in fact, some researchers have compared the way these foods affect the brain to addictive substances like drugs or alcohol. So again, it is not just a willpower thing here, it's a biology thing. Hello, beautiful human. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you learned something new and felt inspired or blessed. If so, please take a moment to share this with a friend who's also working to improve their health and wellness. And leave me an honest review on Apple Podcasts. It lights me up to know that this podcast is helping you. Now, go get some sunshine on your skin, and I will meet you back here on Saturday morning for another episode. Bye!